Welcome to another episode of Selling What's Possible. I'm Dave Irwin, your host, and this is a podcast that is dedicated to enterprise account growth and retention. Joining me today is Fred Diamond, co-founder of Institute for Effective Professional Selling, and also a host and producer of Sales Game Changer podcast. And Fred is a absolute expert in enterprise sales and works with some of the world's largest companies. And Fred, we're delighted to have you here to inform our audience about some of your thoughts on, cultivating strong and collaborative relationships with customers.
Thanks, Dave. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to it all week. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Big fan of what you all do. And thank you so much. Yeah, I host and produce the Sales Game Changers podcast. And, you and I are doing this interview in the spring of 2025. We're well over 750 episodes of that show. We typically interview sales leaders around the globe about how they're leading teams and working with customers. We've actually produced a book called Insights for Sales Game Changers. From that, my career quickly, I was at Apple Computer for a long time, Compact Computer, a couple software companies in all areas of marketing, product marketing, brand, geographic, product, whatever it might be. In early 2002, 2003, I went to work as what we now call a fractional CMO. I just called myself an outsourced VP of marketing. And I realized pretty quickly that most companies were hiring me not because they had marketing challenges, but because they had sales challenges. So I created, at the time, it was called the Institute for Excellence in Sales and Business Development. We're now known as the Institute for Effective Professional Selling. And there's two main things. We changed the name. We also shifted a lot of our programming to focus on companies with at least 100 sales professionals. We're known for our global women in sales programs. We have a couple designations: Premier Women in Sales Employer, Premier Sales Employer. But we mainly work with selling professionals, and their job is to provide better customer outcomes at the end of the day. I mean, it's obviously to drive new business, but a lot of it's also retaining and growing accounts as well, especially, when you have, a set number of accounts. And the things that you're doing are very much in line with what we're working with we call our customers either members or partners. And again, these are all big companies with at least 100 salespeople, and the challenges that they face are, in some cases, quite insurmountable.
Wow, well, that's a great background, and given the fact that you're in enterprise, teams, working, and they're selling to big enterprises as well. There's a lot of buyer complexity. There's a lot of acceleration and sort of buyer enabled capabilities to do their own research, make their own purchase decisions, to disconnect from sellers sort of by design. There's a lot of stats around how, executive buyers don't really want salespeople involved unless they have a couple of, really key attributes, right? Business acumen and understanding of their needs, an ability to help them address problems early in the buying cycle, things like that. So I would imagine you've got a wealth of sort of guidance, advice, ideas. And one of the things that, to frame this, you've come up with these sort of 4 E's. And so that really struck me as a great construct to walk through sort of a guided discussion today. But engagement, empower, elevate, effectiveness. Maybe we can just sort of go through the 4 E's as it relates to enterprise accounts. So I'll just sort of put it back to you, Fred, in terms of engagement. You sort of have a whole philosophy here around what drives success when it comes to customer relationships. Account teams have a motion where they have a lot of repeat sales. So it's not a one-time sale and you're out, but right, you're there for a while. So
Yeah.
Really important topic. So tell us about engagement and your perspective on that.
Well, a little background. So we are very fortunate in that we have relationships, and our customers are large, well-known B2B and business to business and business to government enterprises. And you're right, these are complex deals. They require a lot of time, energy, strategy, contracts, negotiations, compliance. There's a lot of complexity that goes into those types of sales. And since we have a lot of these relationships, over the course of the last year, we went back to a lot of the VPs and sales directors at these companies and said, what are the biggest challenges? And they all said the same thing. We need our people to be more effective. We need our people to be more effective at what you and I are doing, presenting through the internet, building relationships, creating value. Because one of the big outcomes of the pandemic is everybody's challenged more than they were before. Before the pandemic, they used to be very simple. We have our story, our pitch, our tools, our process. We would go to the customer and we would get on their agenda. And yeah, the customer was getting ahead of us because a lot of the access to information was available through the internet, but we still had the opportunity to get in front. Now, the challenge is they're not always right. They might find the information,
Right.
but it might be out of context, it might be wrong. So the sales professionals have had to figure out ways to be more effective at communicating, showing the customer that they understand their business, and not just that they understand their business, they understand where their business is going. Because the customer doesn't need you if you're not providing that type of value. It's all about empowering people, empowering your sales professionals to help customers, empowering your sales professionals uh, to get better. So sales VPs kept saying that to us: help our people be more effective by helping them get more engaged with their customers. But at the end of the day, it's by being more effective, you're helping your customers achieve more, and you're helping your customers achieve their mission, whatever it might be. And you're helping your customers save money, be more productive, pursue new markets, bring new products to market, whatever it might be.
So the first thing that comes to mind is sort of how do you do that? So when you engage with, it sounds like you engage with sales executives in a group where they're many of them tied to enterprise accounts and focused on big customers that have repeat purchases and lots of problems to solve. What are some of the principles of what you recommend? What do you see working? What are sort of how do you do it?
What's happened over the last 5 years is uh, general information just isn't that important. You know, listen to podcasts. Sales reps asking me advice. Well, you definitely need to listen to podcasts. You need to role play. You need to do whatever. General type of advice isn't as valuable as it used to be because companies are pressured to be more successful engaging their customers with specific challenges, right? If you look at the
Right.
sales process, it's not just do these 4 things and you'll be a better sales rep. What they started asking us was, how can my sales reps be more successful selling to American Express? Or how could they be more successful specifically selling at Bank of America? Or how can they be more specifically successful in solving these 3 problems? So what we've done is we've created communities, is one of the things that we're now bringing together at the IEPS. We have 4 communities that we created: women in sales, junior sales professionals, sales leaders, and public sector. But instead of having 200 people in the room, we have 12, and they are facilitated, and it's a safe space. But at the same time, we're giving the companies that are involved with the IEPS, the opportunity to get focus on a specific challenge. So a participant could say something like, I'm not able to get to my customer anymore, like a hypothetical situation. My customer is now remote and they don't reply to emails anymore, but my quote is $1 million, right? Something like that.
Right.
What might be some things I can do? So then the group, we'll get together and talk about some ideas, ask some questions. So hopefully when we're done the session in the community, the sales rep has, or sales manager has 5 ideas that are specific to their challenge. And it's not something like, I need to listen to more podcasts. I mean, we want people to listen, but that's going to make you better, but that's not going to solve your problem selling to American Express. But trying to figure out ways to get to remote buyers or remote decision makers who only come into the office 2 times a month now, right? And they don't live in the city anymore. They now live in North Carolina or Utah or, Florida, wherever it might be, which adds a degree of complexity. They can solve specific problems. And that's been amazing. I mean, we promised our companies that are involved, and they ask us, how do we solve specific problems? And the thing, if I'm a sales rep, the same thing like we talked before about customers, if I want to get better, I could just go to ChatGPT and type in, what are 5 things I should do to become a better sales rep? And it'll shoot out things, and I could get even deeper with the prompts. But it's not going to help me get to the remote customer who works for American Express who no longer returns my emails. So, what are some ideas we could do specifically to get there?
That's great. Yeah, listening to that, one of the observations we have all the time and we hear is it's this inability to collaborate. Account
Mhm.
teams are often complex entities themselves. The teams aren't really trained to be a team; they're just sort of assigned to a team, and so you end up on a team, and a lot of time, you're a fractional team member. So the account executive is sort of in that core position where they have to bring together the team, have a meeting, focus them on an issue or agenda or purpose, but you have to really lead the team down the path of having a you know collaborative environment, I would say. And what you're saying is that by building these collaborative environments, you have a central place where you can start with a problem and actually kind of force everybody to look at the problem at the same time. And I know that this is a frustration by CSOs, not to go sell a product, but how to solve a client problem or how to deal with a complex situation with a customer. So you're basically saying that works well.
If we also, just FYI, we the communities work together. Some cases they're in person, most cases they're digital, some cases they're hybrid. Sometimes we bring larger groups together. But the one thing is that it's, as you're talking here, it's about specific problems, right? Okay, yeah, my quote is $4 million. How am I going to get to 4 million? But it's, how is this customer going to grow, and how do I grow this customer, and how do I solve this problem for this customer? So that's one thing that we're trying to solve with the effectiveness is being specific. What is a specific problem you're dealing with? And people are really struggling right now with, yeah, solving customer challenges, but how do I solve my own challenges that are stopping me from being successful? And we made the shift again from excellence, which is kind of like a broad term, right? And it was a
Yeah.
great term when we started, 12, 13 years ago. Is something to strive for. Well, now people are, because there's so much disruption that's happened everywhere, even now. Again, we're doing today's interview in May of 2025. There's a lot of disruption in the public sector markets and the whole supply chain that supports public sector markets. So, what do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do? And a lot of it comes down to leaders engaging their people more effectively and helping their sales professionals engage their customers so that we can get more information, get the unsaid said, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. Just to tie off, I think collaboration is foundational, as you've indicated here. But also, I think what we see is that the most successful teams that make their number and sell the most or have the most engagement on a almost. I mean, the level of engagement is very, very high. Like
Mhm.
every day, multiple times per day. There's multiple stakeholder groups, but boy, the level of activity, we've seen teams, go out and spend an entire week, every week in and week out at these accounts. And that pays dividends because I think the accounts are eager to get support and help and grow grow friendly with the teams that are highly engaged with their best interests in mind. Do you see the same thing where there's high level of engagement is far surpasses lower levels of engagement where the team's kind of going through the motions but isn't really locking in with the buying stakeholders?
No, you're right on target. I mean, there's a lot of commonalities still. One is, uh, we tell people one of our rules is your objective is the next meeting, right? If you're in sales, yeah, the close, whatever, but it's like get to the next meeting and bring in additional resources. The successful salespeople these days are still the ones that make things happen and get on site and get meetings and propose valuable ideas. It's like one of the biggest challenges facing sales is something that we kind of touched on, is that if I'm a customer and 20 years ago when I was at Apple, well, it was 30 years ago when I was at Apple or Microsoft, whatever, US sales would do like a whole day talking about your product strategy. I remember being in meetings with customers for
Right.
2 days where we would just do PowerPoint after PowerPoint on our 5-year product strategy.
Right.
Now the customer can type in, what is Apple's product strategy for the next 5 years? And chat GPT or Clyde or whatever is going to pop out something, this is what's been communicated. So they don't need you for that. But, and that's not really that valuable for me as a sales professional. But conversely, what's valuable for me as a sales professional is to go to the customer and say, this is your 5-year plan, Mr. Customer. Here's some things that we think we could be doing to help you with
Exactly.
that. And then bring in partners. So we're seeing this like division in the sales force where the middle is getting flushed out, right? Because they're not bringing this value, and the customer can get the information at the lower levels automatically, or they could deal with with a lower level employee to get an appointment or things that they need or specs or whatever. But the whole middle section is getting flushed because the customer doesn't think they need you. So sales professionals are having to step up their game. And really, where their game is getting stepped up, it's in two places. It's in being a customer ally, understanding where the customer is going. And one of the great things about the companies that we work with is all these companies have great resources, like the AWS's, Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle's of the world. So, but sales professionals don't know how to bring in all the right resources. So one thing we spend a lot of time with is helping them figure out who can you bring in to help the customer achieve their goal 1, 2, 3, 5, years down the road. Uh, so that's a huge shift that we're seeing. And kind of like what you alluded to before, Dave, if the sales professionals don't understand that now, they better understand it quickly. Because, you hear a lot of things. Is AI going to replace sales? AI is going to replace a lot of the functions that don't need a high paid sales professional, but the high paid sales professional is a valuable athlete in your company. I still go by this statement that the last person out the door on your last day in business is going to be your worst salesperson, right? Nothing happens until something gets sold. That's, those kind of things. They're
Right.
still very, very true. So yeah, just to reiterate what you just said, the great sales professionals, they are forcing the issues. They're figuring out ways to spend time with the customer. And the reality is that's when the gold happens. You know, Customer says something, a trained sales professional knows how to listen to for certain cues, right? They're not always there like I'm doing right now, doing all the talking, but it's like they're there to listen for something that someone says maybe at the 59th minute, you know, or something that someone says like in a question, like, why did they ask that question about how we help whatever it might be? And then really thinking hard about, oh, well, maybe the customer is trying to initiate something there. And it's hard to make that happen on Zoom. You can, but with Zoom type stuff, people want to cut off, move to the next thing, take some bio type breaks, if you will. So it's a lot of times when you're online directly, you want to get the message, the meeting across, because you're on a short time. You can't see how people are interacting. So we tell people try to get those meetings. They're still gold. You have to get in the room.
Yeah, I love the athlete sort of analogy, because I think an account executive, like an enterprise seller, prospecting, is there's a whole motion there, but there's also on the account executive side a motion where you are coordinating and leading a team of resources that span a lot of disciplines in some cases, and you can get into really massive contractual relationships and engagements where there's a you're really coordinating, a an ecosystem of resources in concert with the buyer's resources, and you almost have to lead on both sides of that ball. So you talked about elevate being one of the four E's. When you get into, I'm not sure that people define what an account executive in sort of the job description really has to do. It's more like
Mm.
you learn it over time because you've had to do all these things you never would have thought you had to do to get the outcomes for the customer, for your own company. Management's just expecting the outcomes to occur on their side, but you have to make sure they occur on the customer side. So, what are the dimensions of I guess elevating that premier athlete that sort of elevates to that leadership role is really important. And what guidance would you have around, just, what is that what's the DNA of that role in your opinion, and how does that manifest itself? And you know, um, what is the responsibilities of that accounting? How do you just sort of lean in and embrace the fact that you get to manage this complexity as part of your job? But I'm going to be, if you're really good at it, you're going to be able to produce a value exchange on both sides. It's really, really powerful, and that's
So
rewarding.
yeah, we work with a lot of we work with leaders, and we work with a lot of account execs and sales professionals, et cetera. And the ones that we found are most successful are the ones where their company is committed to helping them grow, right? And where they feel that there's a now not everybody is that interested in going up the ladder, so to speak, but if you're invested in a lot of the companies that we're talking about here, you want to be rewarded, you want to be appreciated, you want to have a path. Even if somebody doesn't want to grow as a leader to become the CRO, they still want to see a growth path to make more money, be more involved, work. If they just want to kind of stay in the same place, it's the tools that they need to help them be successful. And where we've seen a lot of sales organizations struggle is where the the sales professional doesn't feel that the company is behind them, and that they don't feel that they're participating in their personal success. So the companies that become members of the Institute for Effective Professional Selling, they're making a commitment to their people by putting them through our Women in Sales Leadership Program, by putting them through their Emerging Leaders
Yeah.
Program. So, a lot of it comes down to that. And a lot of times we found that companies lose sight of that because maybe they're too deep into the woods of the challenge, right? Especially during the pandemic. Everybody was trying to survive. Even today, again, we're doing today's interview in 2025. A lot of entities are still struggling to survive, right? We see changes every day, and every industry is being disintermediated, and they're being shifted. The whole hospitality industry, the whole restaurant industry, travel industry, a lot of those industries are being changed by a lot of things that have come to the marketplace in the last 5 years. So at the same time, though, for the professional account exec, professional sales professional, they've been telling us they want to see that their company is committed to their growth, or their company is committed to their success, however that may look. There's still a lot of that human touch type things, right?
Yeah.
Account execs, sales professionals, they're human beings, and they want to feel appreciated. Yeah, luckily, the people that we're talking to have the opportunity to be compensated well, and to be remunerated well, but they also want to be acknowledged, and they want to know that training is available to them, and they also want to know that what they have to say will be listened to. So we work with a lot of the companies to provide leadership opportunities for their people, not just within a company. One thing that's kind of striking a chord, a lot of the companies that we work with, and you might probably as well, they do a really good job training their people on their products, and they do a really good job training their people on how to use the systems, how to use Salesforce
Right.
or HubSpot, whatever it might be. What they don't do is train their people on how to be sales professionals, and maybe in your case, account execs. So they come to us and say, we want our people to be sales professionals. That's why we changed our name from sales to IEPS, professional selling. So our unit right now is about people who are in the game, who are acknowledging that they're in sales. So yeah, so that's the role that we play, and that's a challenge with a lot of the companies out there.
Well, I think one of the messages you just clearly articulated is that I often feel management is often disconnected from what the account teams have to do every day in real life. So
Absolutely.
there's numbers and spreadsheets and systems and reports, but what the account teams actually have to live through with the customer is so much more complex and involves so many, um, you know, uh, you know, basically navigating an obstacle course in a maze of challenges on the customer side, but also inside their own company. And what you're saying is when you find a good athlete that can do that well, make sure that you reward and acknowledge, those leaders, and put wind behind their sails, because if you're sort of ignored or left off to the sidelines and it's taken for granted that that individual is just going to be there day in and day out driving that massive account relationship, that's a danger, because that person, can get demotivated or just sort of be overwhelmed with so much work and so much coordination. They're just crushed under the weight of it all, and eventually burn out. Right, the burnout rates, I think, for enterprise account sellers are very high. There's a lot of frustration around, I have to do all this stuff internally for management, but nobody helps me do my job or makes my job easier. I just expected to do this incredible array of things that have to be done and coordinated all, but everything seems to be, I've got to report all this stuff internally and spend half my time. I think some of the stats on the amount of account sellers, I think, actually have the least amount of client-facing time of anybody, because they're doing so much stuff internally. So I would I'd use your comments as a call out to management that says you got to pay attention to what these people really have to do,
Well,
acknowledge them, and keep them motivated.
I'll say something. I agree with you 1,000%. I'm going to say something that may be controversial with people listening here, but there's a value in being in the office. And I know a lot of companies have, because of the pandemic, everybody went home, et cetera. And we had to put all these systems in place and we had to figure it out. But our studies, our research, our conversations have shown that there's much more engagement when people are in an office. You can have those meetings and then, hey, let's keep this going over lunch type of a thing. And I talk to CEOs and VPs of sales and CROs every day, and that's a challenge. But the world has said, well, we want to work from home because we've gotten used to it, and we don't want to throw on a suit on a Tuesday. And excuse me, we want to be at home and have the freedom to to do whatever it is they need to do, and that's great. And we're all behind that work lifestyle, et cetera. But we see this all the time. There's a struggle because a lot of the rigidness in a good way and a lot of the discipline, it's probably a better way to say it, is lost when people aren't in the office. And a lot of companies like Amazon and even the government, who's implemented, federal government, said you need to be in the office now. People were throwing arrows at that because, well, that's not the way it should be. We've been used to working from home. And well, we hear this from sales leaders all the time, that there are people who are working from home 3 days a week. They're struggling, right? You might be online all day, but not everything is said in front of the screen, and not everything is interpreted the right way. Again, you and I, we're looking at each other from our torsos up, and it's nice that I see books on your back and the picture of the brain and all those things, and you see my Picasso behind me and stuff like that. But also, when we turn off in companies, we turn off, and even just seeing people twice a week, it's leading to a lot of disengagement. And we just see that. The reality is, if people think it's controversial, that's great. We see that. And it's a struggle. And sales professionals, sales leaders are trying to figure out ways to decrease that and provide a balance if they're going to continue to provide a balance.
Well, yeah, I think you're reinforcing the concept that, a high degree of engagement requires collaboration. Collaboration fosters ideation and innovation, which creates more things to engage on in problem solving, which pulls both the buyer teams and the selling teams together more. So if that's how that collaboration happens, there's got to be a mix of I don't know, togetherness, physically as well as digitally, and some balance there. And if you don't mind the store on the collaboration side, you're basically decaying the amount of ideas that come out. So keep a high level of that going, and that leads to effectiveness with customers and across the board. I also think it leads to teams. What we see is account teams that are highly engaged they're very motivated by the very work that they're doing. There was almost like an intrinsic desire to achieve things for the customer that builds on itself. And you can see account team. I mean, we see account teams grow accounts by tens of millions of dollars in very short time frames. Through, it's I used to call it acts of heroism,
Mm.
by individuals just somehow pulling this off. But the team does get a dynamic, sort of a team dynamic that when it comes together, like a great sports team is able to win the Super Bowl. It's very effective. When you talk about effectiveness, it's like, how do you foster that sort of account team? And so I put that on the account leaders have to be the ones to drive the cadence of collaboration, right? And set the meetings and not just fade off and sort of think things are going to get done. So I think that's a great message, for our audience is to hear it from you and to hear it from what you're seeing in the marketplace. So as we wrap up here, Fred, just in terms of time, what are some of your thoughts, just of final thoughts of things in 2025, the best, executive sellers are doing, should think about doing, on top of what we've talked about today? Just the final thoughts here.
Yeah, it just and I like your reiteration of collaboration, because if you think about it, in enterprise to enterprise sales, I think the latest stat is something like in an enterprise sale, the customer has 10 persons involved. And those are all different people: tech, contracts,
Yeah.
legal, end user, contracts, whatever it might be, finance. So even the best sales professional doesn't know how to speak excellently to all of those entities. So the people on your team that understand, well, maybe we should do this because it looks like finance is more involved than we thought. Or, let's bring in our advanced tech team because they're bringing in their advanced tech team. So, the average sales professional, even if he or she is great at understanding the technology, uh, they can only go so far. So, how do you bring in the right resources to match your right resources? Just the last thing I would probably talk about, we haven't talked too much about the role of AI in the sales process. And we're spending a lot of time with that. Uh, we did every year we do a big award event. It's called the IEPS Sales Excellence Awards. And we just did our 15th annual award in the beginning of May. And we gave an award to the guy who runs public sector globally for NVIDIA. And we also gave out our first from the IEPS AI for Sales Excellence Awards. We recognize a couple companies that are using AI in the sales process. And we anticipate that's going to blow up. One thing we realized was when we put out the invitation for nominations for our AI for Sales Excellence Award, I expected that we were going to get like 150 to 200 nominations. We got like a dozen, and it had nothing to do with our marketing or communication. It had to do with the fact that a lot of people aren't using AI yet to be excellent in various sales processes. So we were very surprised about that. We were excited because that's part of what we're doing, bringing to the marketplace. And a lot of people are interested, but a lot of people aren't excellent yet from an enterprise, sales type perspective. So one of my things that I would encourage sales professionals to do, and account execs and people that are listening to the show, is get deep into AI beyond ChatGPT. I mean, I use ChatGPT every day for things, and it's great and it helps to understand things and communicate. But there's a lot of other technologies within the AI world that you could use for communications, for prospecting, for messaging, whatever it might be, for help you become a better sales professional. So dig into it, explore, try something different every day. But that's something that the sales professionals who are going to be sales professionals a year, 2 years from now, are going to be optimal at, is utilizing AI for sales processes and sales excellence.
Yeah, and I to that point, I think it's also incumbent on the enablement professionals, management as well, to infuse AI into the workflows
Yeah.
of the sales professionals. So it's sort of there um, by design and
Yep.
not on the account executive to choose to go out on their own and use it and then come back in. It's sort of built into these workflows, and we see a lot of huge efficiency gains, because if you bring the right data in with the AI to create an understanding of a problem, match the solution, need the solution fit, to articulate the right message, package it in a way that is actionable, and you build that into what the account sellers and executive sellers have to do. It's just becomes part of their day to day, and then it's sort of built into the way that they're working. And we see a huge upside to for companies to think about designing that in the first place.